Be helpful if we did some quick introductions, and we can just have a sense of what different roles people have. So I'll start. I'm Megan Cope. I'm the chair of the Planning Commission, and I've been on it in a long time, 11 years, I think. And I'll pass it on to Chapin.
Hey, Chapin Kaner, I'm vice chair, and I think I might have been on the Planning Commission for 4 years. I'm also have been GMT's representative to the GMT commissioner from Williston, but I'm now the alternate commissioner from Williston.
Kate, you want to go?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Kate Lamar, I've been on the commission, I don't really remember, since 2016, I think. And yeah, just a commissioner.
Great. And Jill?
I'm Jill, planning commissioner, and I think I joined in 2018 or 2019, a couple of years.
Great. And okay, so why don't we turn it over to the other folks on the call now, and if you can introduce yourself quickly and just give us a sense of what your role is, it'd be helpful. Ken, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. I'm Ken Beliveau. I am here with Jack Glazer, who is the property owner, and also David Burke, here representing the Glazers for an item on your agenda later on.
Thanks. Mr. Glazer?
I'm Jack Glazer, and I'm the aforementioned person that Ken and David are representing. I'm a property owner in Williston and have some interesting topics to share with you.
Okay. Mr. Burke?
David Burke, O'Leary Burke Civil Associates.
Thank you. Jeff Farrell, do you want to give yourself a quick intro?
Sorry, Jeff Farrell. I'm the consultant working on the visioning master plan and the form-based code for Taft Corners.
All right. Mr. Snyder, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yep. I'm Chris Snyder with Snyder Homes, and here presenting some information and wanting to gather some information from the Planning Commission tonight.
And Mr. Rowe.
Andy Rowe with Lamoureux and Dickinson, here kind of listening tonight, but associated with Chris's project on the former church property.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. It's really helpful to have a sense of who's who's in what group, working with whom, and so forth. And Emily, can you just remind me, is Matt at the select board meeting tonight?
Matt's still here. I don't know why.
Oh, he's there. You're about like a centimeter high on my screen.
Can see that.
Could not see you. Okay. Do you folks want to introduce yourselves also, and Melinda?
Sure. Matt Belanger. I'm the planning director here in Williston. There I am.
There we go. Emily Heyman, planner for Town of Williston.
Linda Scott, conservation planner for Town of Williston.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Okay, so our first order of business, sorry, I always have to navigate multiple screens to find our agenda, is, I believe, the minutes to for January 4th. Did anybody, I made a couple of very small edits on the Google Doc. Does anyone else have anything that they would like to?
I made a couple of edits, which I hope I was unable to make it show track changes.
Yeah.
Track changes was off and I couldn't turn it on. But I made you the chair, Megan, and me the vice chair. And I clarified what I'd said about chargers, that it's not that chargers were cheap, but that the electricity that runs through a level 2 charger is less than $1 an hour's worth of electricity. So I just clarified that, and that was
Okay.
it.
Great. I think the only major change I made was I had tried to highlight my changes. And one of them was about the word, there was a word displeased regarding chargers. And I think it was supposed to be something like dispensed. So that dispensed said displeased.
Yes, and you know
It was
what?
kind
That
of
was
funny.
that was probably an autocorrect on my thing. I'm saying, no,
Okay.
actually, I meant dispensed. Yes, and I'll bet
Okay.
I bet it was a yep. That's exactly the
Yeah,
sentence that I fixed.
I just reviewed them half an hour ago, so it's quite recent. In any case, we
Great.
don't want electricity's displeasure. Okay. I think as I said, I made a couple really small little edits, changing the wording of things, and
Yep.
or adding a verb when it was missing and that kind of thing. So
I'll move we accept the minutes as amended.
do I have a second?
I can second.
Thank you, Kate. And I am trying so that I can see everybody, which is tricky right now. Oh, thank you. Getting rid of screen sharing. So all in favor of approving of the motion to approve the minutes as amended? Raise your hand. Okay. All right. So that was unanimous with 5 of us. 1, 2, 3, 4 of us. Yes. All right. Thank you very much. And our next item is for public comment regarding items that are not on the agenda. Do we have any public comment?
I have a comment I'd like to make if I could. I know that you're talking about, you've been talking about form-based code recently, and a number of conversations I've had with Matt the last several months. And one of the things that he's reminded me of is a very spirited debate amongst the planning commissioners over the height of buildings, which goes back certainly prior to my retirement. And one of the things that I mentioned to Matt repeatedly, and if he hasn't passed it on, then he deserves punishment for that, is so there's a building on Shelburne Road in South Burlington. It's directly across the street from Panera Bread. And I know, Megan, you often made the case about, sort of some of the benefits of a visual preference survey and kind of seeing, rather than just describing in words, what things would look like. Well, this building, I bring this up as an example. It's a 4-story building. And, that I know that's been a point of contention with the planning commission in the past because the town only allows a maximum of 3 stories. But I would recommend that any and all of you, if you have the time, take a look at this building. And, I had to pass it. I pass it every day, almost every day now. I had to sort of work to count the number of stories because it didn't appear all that big. It's also, in my view, it's a very attractive looking building. So take those words for what they're worth. Oh, Matt, good job.
Emily's on that, but
That's Emily.
yes.
She's a whiz at those things.
So,
And I
yeah,
know-
anyway.
We didn't get down to Shelburne Road when we did our walk around with the PC, but we did make our consultant stay at a hotel on Shelburne Road.
Anyway, that's my comment. I just wanted to sort of throw my 2 cents in there. Something for you that's close by that you could take a look at and would give you an example of certainly what a 4-story or perhaps more could look like in, as properly developed.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say our conversations have certainly evolved since you were here, Ken, and I think there is, particularly for the growth center, there is been, I'd say a broadening of our perspective collectively. So yeah, thank you for that though.
Sure.
Any other public comment? Okay. Our next item is the Chittenden County Unified Planning Work Program requests. And is one of our planners going to lead us through this? I wasn't quite sure who was. Is this you, Matt?
Yeah, I'll take you through this. And this is intended to be more or less just an information item to the Planning Commission, but I'll be speaking with the Select Board about this later tonight. The CCRPC Unified Planning Work Program is generally the framework that we use to request assistance from the CCRPC staff or consultant assistance via some of the funding mechanisms that CCRPC has available. And there are a number of items in here that come out of the planning office that I wanted to highlight for you, because many of them are follow-ups to things that came up during our Taft Corners conversation. So I wanted to give the commission members sort of an up-to-the-minute update on that. There are also some elements to this that originate from the Public Works Department. Two of these are traffic counts and signage inventory. They're a little bit more mundane, but we get quite a fair amount of work done through the CCRPC every year, monitoring conditions on roads in Williston, and also using their staff for data gathering purposes. The sign inventory, for example, is not about the kind of signs we talk about at the Planning Commission. It's about road signs and signs that are maintained by the town. Similarly, there's a stormwater work plan item under Public Works, and this has to do with adding more enrichment to the data set the town maintains about stormwater facilities within the town. Locating the literal nuts and bolts, the pipes, the outfalls, and basins that are part of the system that treats stormwater in Williston. So then on to the Planning Commission or Planning Department. We have a request, the first one you see there related to comprehensive plan data development. Believe it or not, we will be writing another town plan just before you know it. And this is a request that during FY23, we would get some help assembling some baseline updated data about Williston from the CCRPC. We anticipate starting this at the point where basically everything that's going to be coming out of the 2020 decennial census will be available for us to use, as well as maybe anticipating some updates from the American Community Survey. And this is feels pretty preliminary to a town plan that doesn't really need to be replaced until August of 2025. But when we look at our work plan, toward the end of fiscal 2023, we want to be in a good position to hold a mirror up to the town and say, this is who the numbers say Williston is, or what the numbers say Williston is. And now that we've got your attention, we've got some questions for you that would form the groundwork for public input on the next town plan. The next item is an affordable housing needs assessment. This is essentially getting some custom data from CCRPC related to housing needs in Williston and the region. And the main reason that we would like to take this on is, of course, during our conversations about Taft Corners, there were lots of conversations that we put into our project journal about the desire to create opportunity for affordable housing, especially in Taft Corners. And we had a letter from the Racial Equity Partnership without using those words that really requested that the town consider something like inclusionary zoning, where some percentage of certain developments is required to be built as perpetually affordable housing. Under statute, a prerequisite to doing inclusionary zoning is having some needs assessment work done. So we wanted to get that going so that if the Planning Commission did want to pursue questions around inclusionary zoning or other affordable housing tactics, we wouldn't be caught short not having that initial data work done. The next one, multimodal hub scoping study. Multimodal hub is the term we use for transit center because transit center makes people at the RPC nervous that we want to build something that looks like what's in Burlington in Taft Corners. And although we've used the word transit center a lot in our Taft Corners effort, we know that what we really are talking about is a nice bus stop with a place to get out of the rain. And this is particularly coming off of official map and mode shift facility work done by the Planning Commission and the Mobility Committee, wanting to move forward and gather more information about the idea of building that hub at Maple Tree Place, most likely. Lastly, Growth Center Communal Stormwater Management System Feasibility Study. This sounds like more than it is. It's really a plan to plan. And this also comes out of the vision document from Taft Corners, where one of the items that we identified in the overarching issues was that the planned development pattern in Taft Corners would only happen to the extent that it could be worked in around necessary stormwater infrastructure. And particularly on smaller sites, building in a dense compact form on a small portion of a lot with an alley down the middle, et cetera, doesn't leave a lot of room for big conventional stormwater treatment. And so this would be the beginnings of some work to look into collective stormwater treatment, collaborative stormwater treatment between the town and private business, and ways in which we could think about how the build out of Taft Corners would be impacted by different strategies around stormwater. And that's it. I will note the absence of one project that we've talked a lot about, which is bringing the regulating plan and public realm street sections into the town's public works specifications. We had hoped to have that work done as a CCRPC project. We found out that that project is considered too much like design and therefore not available for federal transportation dollar match. So we're going to have to pursue a different avenue, possibly municipal planning grant, to get those street sections drawn into the public works standard specs to match what's in the regulating plan and public realm standards in the draft form-based code. That's all I got.
Great. Thank you so much, Matt. Chapin, you have a question?
I just had a comment, which I was delighted to see this list, and especially the last three items seemed like very appropriate follow-on to our form-based code work. And we hadn't talked about this as a planning commission, but to me, they're right on target. So thanks.
Great, thank you.
Great. Matt, this is a tiny little comment, but in the comp plan data development, if you could make sure to request information about jobs and the journey to work, the kind of journey to work data, that would be super. I know that that's actually a really important factor for Williston in particular. So that would be
absolutely
great. Thank you. Any other questions or comments on the Unified Planning Work Program? Okay, moving right along. I believe our next item is the specific plan preliminary conversation about the Glazer property. And I'm going to turn it over to whoever is leading this.
You ready?
Yeah, do you want me to give just the briefest introduction, Ken?
Oh, please do, Matt.
Ken Beliveau, who I think most of you know, and Jack Glazer, property owner, are here to have a preliminary conversation with the Planning Commission about a potential specific plan. It's in Williston in the residential zoning district at the intersection of Mountain View and Old Stage Road. And all I really want to say is this is a very preliminary conversation. No application for specific plan has been filed at this time, and staff sees this as an opportunity for the applicants and their representatives to have an open conversation and about a 15-minute Q&A session with Planning Commission members. Very, very informal. Take it away.
Great. Well, thank you, Matt. And it's nice to see a lot of folks I haven't seen in a long time, albeit in a different role tonight. So I'm here with Jack Glazer, who's a property owner, and David Burke from O'Leary Burke, civil engineering consultant. And Jack and his wife, Caitlin, own a property at the corner of Old Stage Road and Mountain View Road. It's on the southwest corner of the intersection of those two streets. And this is a property that I think for anybody that's knowledgeable about Williston and the Williston regulatory plans, this is a property that would immediately come to mind if you were thinking about development potential in town, because it's one of the few properties that are in the residential zoning district of any sort of acreage that's not developed currently. And some of you may know that the residential district, unlike most of the town, is served or potentially served by municipal water and sewer. So it has a significant amount of development potential. The base density allowed in the residential zoning district is 3 dwelling units per acre. This property is roughly 97 acres. We have some understanding that there are some wetlands present on the property. It hasn't been precisely delineated yet, but I think it's reasonable that there could be anywhere from 20 to 30 acres, depending on the extent of a delineation that might be considered wet and thus would have to be mapped out before you would calculate any density. That said, at 3 dwelling units per acre, if you had 70 acres in play, that would be over 200 dwelling units that would be potential development on this piece of property. So I sort of throw that out as sort of a hypothetical. Now, one of the other aspects about this property is that there is what has been understood and mapped out to be a highly desirable view corridor that goes across, would be the, Matt, if you can, Matt or Emily, work the cursor right near the intersection of the two roads in that corner, all in that section, and that's been mapped out. It's been identified within the town plan as being something that the town has determined to be desirable and is worth saving. So this presents a potential opportunity, I think, for the town and the property owner to work together, where the town may be able to protect an asset, an open space asset that's been identified as being important to the town, and perhaps see a lesser amount of development on the property. And for the property owners, it could potentially allow them to move forward with the development of the property in a time frame that would not be possible going through the traditional growth management cycle. The growth management piece, as some of you may know, in this part of town, it has a limit. I believe it's 20 dwelling units per calendar year on an annual basis. So, and it's fairly constrained. So that's kind of a big overview. I did draft a letter that summarized some of the data just a little bit in a table, and then the graphic that Matt was just showing you, we also prepared that map just to sort of show you the property within the surrounding area. So we are interested in potentially working with the town to see if there may be some common ground that could be realized between the property owners and the town. And I know Jack would like to say a few words. I'm going to allow him to chime in, since he's the one that knows his property better than anyone.
Thanks, Ken. And thanks to you all for making the opportunity for us to discuss this with you. So my wife, Kate, and I own this property. We purchased it from the Ezermans in the early 2000s. We've been longtime residents of Williston. My wife moved here in the 70s. I moved here in the 80s. Our kids went to school here. I have a business near Taft's Corners on Allenbrook Lane where we develop software for brain research. We love Williston, and it's getting to the point in our life where we're not able to keep this land open, and as it is any longer, we're going to have to think about moving to the next phase of our lives. So we realized that this is a really prime spot to develop and to do responsible development, because we see the need in Williston for housing, for having centralized housing that really keeps the village, the nature of the village, true to a village concept. And we also believe in keeping as much of the wildlife and the land in conservation as we possibly can. So what our long-term vision is to, make this property into a place where more people can live, and where we preserve as much of the wildlife and open spaces as possible. And we would just like to work with the town in order to make that a reality.
Okay, thank you. So let's open it up for questions. Hello, planning commissioners. Chapin, go ahead.
Guess you can count on me. Thank you, and I really appreciate hearing your overall sort of where you're coming from, Jack. At the risk of, I feel like this is the right time to do this. I feel as though we have received comments as a planning commission that are relevant to this. And I have some opinions that I think are mostly shared in the work we've done. And so I'm just going to sort of say what they are in the fact that that would indicate, if you were to do a specific plan, what would be the significant benefit part that you would be offering. And so I'll talk about that a little bit. The comments we've gotten strongly from many people who live in the residential district is that they wish there were more open space and more wildlife. And so anything that retains open space while developing is very much valued. Another one is that we have had trouble finding an east-west rec path corridor. And I'm not talking about the widening of Mountain View or Route 2 to have a bike lane on the side. I'm talking about something that somebody with children on bikes could use, or a way that people would bicycle from other parts of the residential district towards Catamount, that we're lacking an east-west path other than what goes behind Allenbrook School, because after that you're on roads until you get up to behind Williston Central School, which isn't the way to get to Catamount. So the kind of enjoyable through the woods and fields rec path that would also serve as a conduit for people wanting to bike from east to west through the residential district is a huge value. The viewscape, as you know, the street view from Google, unfortunately, was on a cloudy day where you couldn't see Camel Sump, but that's locational on Mountain View is where you see Camel Sump, and is obviously a very wonderful view spot. And the other thing, and I may not be speaking for the entire planning commission, this may be more me, but we recently adopted an energy plan amendment to our town plan. And the goals that we've had in the past of trying to cluster development in to have less infrastructure per unit, less road, instead of having one house every 2 acres or every half acre, you have a cluster of houses, has less road, less disturbance to the environment. And when houses are in a form that share walls, you have less loss of heat. And so our energy plan goals are met better by land use that's clustered and by buildings that share heating envelope as much as possible. So I just thought those are some things I'd mentioned that have come up in discussions in the last couple of years of things that we've looked at.
Thank you, Chapin. Ken or Jack, would you like to respond?
Sure. Well, so, on the question, your question, Chapin, about significant public benefit, that is one of the things that the town has to make a finding on in order to be able to approve a specific plan. And so there is some criteria in the bylaw in chapter 9. And one of them has to do with open space. And as I made reference to in my letter to the board, there are actually some specific open space assets that are identified. And the view shed across the northeast corner of this property is one of them. So that's quite frankly is the low-hanging fruit in terms of being able, without doing any additional analysis of what I would call a significant public benefit. But certainly in, your other comments about open space and potentially to develop an east-west pedestrian corridor, those would be some other things that could possibly come with this. The one thing I would say about the pedestrian corridor is I know that there are some technical issues that are beyond our control that would need to be worked through, like wetlands, whether you get a permit from the state to go through there, things of that sort. I know when Northridge developed, there was some discussion about a pedestrian corridor, and some of those barriers surfaced and had to be worked through. But I would say, yeah, there's some real potential along those lines to see those things realized as part of a plan like this. Jack, would you like to add anything to that?
Well, I just thought, Chapin, I don't know if you've been talking to my wife, but she says the exact same things that you just said. Really, we're big advocates in cluster development and trying to make really the footprint people have on the land much more contained, and thus leaving more space open for, just to keep open rather than having everyone have a half-acre lot. So in addition to, what Ken said, I think we see a lot of potential for the property, and you've given a couple of ways that I think will basically benefit all of the citizens in Williston. And, our goal, as I said earlier, is really to work with the town so that we can come up with a plan that is really something that everyone is happy with. Maybe that's a altruistic goal, but it is, what we hope to do.
Okay, thank you. We just have a minute or two left for this allocated time period. Any other questions from planning commissioners? All right, well, thank you both for coming along and for introducing us to this idea. And
So
Matt,
one last thing, if I could, please,
Yeah.
Megan, I'll be very,
Sure.
very brief, is I think what we would hope for is if we could get some kind of information or from you folks as to whether or not you think this thing has some potential, because we're not really interested in, wasting your time or, expending a lot of time on our end to come in with an application and it's just, well, yeah, you can submit an application if you want, but good luck with that. And I don't think that's good for anybody. So I think it would be helpful if we could get, some kind of communication back from the board. If not tonight, maybe, at your next meeting, folks have a time to think about it or whatever. But I think that would be useful. That would be useful for us on our end, because I know it's an elaborate process to go through a specific plan. And, we would want it to be a worthwhile endeavor for all parties involved.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Chapin, I'll come to you in a second. I just have a couple of very quick sort of thoughts from my own perspective. One is that with specific plans, we are really allotting about a 10-month lead time because of the amount of work that's involved and the nature of our work plan. And then the other key thing that I just wanted to mention is I'm sure Mr. Glazer is well aware of the outcry a couple of years ago from some local groups who were very, very distressed at the thought of development on your property. And so I would just give you a heads up, if you were not aware of it, that there is likely to be a fair amount of public concern about such a proposal. I'll also just mention that, and you may be aware of this yourself, living in town, that that overall, I have a sense that residents of Williston are extremely tired of development in general, and construction in particular. And so those are just two things, kind of quick little thoughts that jumped out for me. And I'll let you take them as you will, but just kind of broader, having sat in this position for a while, these are things I'm hearing and seeing. Chapin, did you want to have a final comment?
Just two things. One is to make really clear that what I was sharing is musings based on our experience the last couple of years, and nothing hard. And I think what you're asking for, Ken, is something harder. And then it sounds like, is your only reason for considering specific plan is in order to have an accelerated growth management allocation?
Well, that's one of the primary ones. The other thing is in terms of the preservation of open space relative to all of the other things. In the absence of that, it could be very difficult to achieve those goals. At the same time, to realize, what would be a realistic development potential for the property. So, I think that's a big part of the trade-off here in doing the specific plan creates the potential to protect the open space that going through the traditional development route might not be able to yield that result.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And we will try to give you some kind of a temperature check as soon as we can. We're very thin on our board members, our commission members tonight. So I do feel compelled to have our other members participate in a discussion and to see where everybody's thinking. Okay, but thank you very much. Matt,
Great.
did you have anything to add?
Not right now, just I think it would be good for members to maybe individually think about if you have questions for myself or Emily or Melinda on this, or if folks want to discuss this further, let us know. Otherwise, we would see this next as some form of application. I will say that, I am one of two people in this room who's wrestled with growth management as a staff person for over a decade. And growth management as a system in Williston has some unintended consequences. And one of them is that it makes it hard to do large projects, and large projects are sometimes the ones where there are other elements of the project that are achievable, like a big piece of open space or a big piece of infrastructure, and Williston has seen that. And we have a lot of hard conversations with a lot of applicants here about what it means to need to face a project over many years or even a decade plus. And if anybody has any questions for me about sort of what it is that growth management can do other than just limit the pace of residential growth, I'm happy to have that. And, you know, I think that it's a system that really does create some benefits for the town, but also some costs. And this is sometimes a way to deal with that. So I'll leave it at that for commission members to reach out with questions.
Kate, did you have a comment on this?
Oh, yeah, I just had a question. Is there a plan that you, or a design that, I don't know how to say this, but do you have an idea of what you want to go in there? Or is this just at the very, very beginning of the thought process on that? Like what type of homes or community?
Well, yeah. So first of all, yeah, we're at the beginning. And it's not like we've got, you know, a plan in our back pocket that we're just going to pull out and go, here you go. This is, you know, we got it all worked out. You know, as I alluded to at the beginning, you know, one of the basic things you have to do in Williston is you have to do a constraints map of any property. And that would be something that we would have to do. We have sort of an idea, but the town's regulations really want you to do more than just have an idea. You have to do a specific delineation. I think as Jack has already alluded to, we really are interested in potentially doing something where there could be some sort of clustering, whatever form that might take. We would certainly be open to that, but not necessarily, you know, we're not necessarily interested in, we're going to do, you know, everybody's going to sit on, you know, 2 acres of land and that's going to be it. We're going to chop up the open space and privatize it, but really look to see work with the town to see what the town would want. And that would also include what Chapin referenced earlier, which is that, you know, where might the streets go? Where might a, you know, pedestrian facility, multi-use path, whatever form that might take, where those might go. And so all that, you know, really, it would require additional conversations to work out those details, but we're very much interested in working with the town at a partnership sort of level.
Thank you. Yeah, I would say that I think a pedestrian path in that space would be a great benefit to the town, but understand the restraints on that too.
Okay, thanks again. And thank you, Matt, for your offer of answering questions from those of us in the Planning Commission. I think I'd also like to loop in Alex and Shayla and make sure that they have a chance to ponder this a bit. Okay, again, thank you folks for coming in. Our next item for our consideration is yet another specific plan preliminary conversation. And this one is, I believe, headed up by Mr. Snyder. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, go ahead.
Matt or Emily, do you want to do a lead in or?
Only the briefest. So sort of the same thing I said prior to our last agenda item. This is intended to be an informal conversation. No application for specific plan has been filed. Some planning commission members who have been following the story of this piece of property in Taft Corners may recall that Chris Snyder did bring this to the town DRB, Development Review Board, as a pre-application filing back last year. This project is eligible for growth management review. But like the other subject property you saw, it's a large single piece of property with some opportunities on it for master planning, and the growth management limitations in the Taft Corners area would present some challenges to the applicant. So this is not only another informal conversation about specific plan, but it's another informal conversation about some challenges a project might have with growth management. And also there are some opportunities to convey what might be considered substantial public benefits under the bylaw. And I think I'll leave it at that, Chris, and let you get right into it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. It's always good to be in front of boards and understand kind of what have the opportunity to be in front of a board and talk about a proposed neighborhood. As Matt mentioned, we have been through the DRB, and we do have preliminary or pre-application approval, and we are in the growth management process. And I think the big question that I think Matt and Emily and I and Andy have been working on is like, do we just go through the normal development process on this particular proposed neighborhood? And I think we've come back and said, hey, you know what, we can. And we feel confident about our current design. However, at the same time, there's an opportunity, and that we think that we believe that we can provide some specific benefit to the town on a couple of items that I think will would allow for an improved velocity and also sort of a faster construction cycle, and also additional housing that people say they want in Williston. And I do understand that people are tired of construction. However, and we've certainly been involved in that, I think, as the home builder, and also involved in the commercial areas at Finney Crossing over the last 11 years. But I think it's also resulted in a very, we're going to be pretty much done over there in the next, 18 months to 2 years. So there are a lot of people who live there and love living there. And so this is an extension, that we're excited about. This is a proposed neighborhood. There are proposed 3 multifamily buildings, and those 2 orange ones and a purple. And with this specific plan, idea is that actually all of the buildings would be multifamily housing and still remain as multifamily housing, but that we would dedicate one of the buildings to a 100% area median income affordable limits. And the idea would be that one of the 2 orange buildings would become that. And there is some real rationale behind why one of those 2 specific would be, in that really what you want to do is you don't want to have an affordable housing building that is not really connected, that's separate from the others. You want to make sure that everybody has equal opportunities, equal access, and we feel that that's a real benefit. So I think one of the real benefits that we could offer is that piece, and the other benefit is, and Emily, I don't know if you can go, one of the ideas that we've sort of talked about is that we could potentially connect Finney Crossing to Brennan Woods with a bridge over the Allen Brook. So when we were developing Finney Crossing, we created an easement for the town's access, which is down where Emily was just pointing. But to date, there's not been any proposals or any other future movement on that. And so what we could do is potentially connect these 2 neighborhoods via the bridge over the Allen Brook. And so if you think about the bridge, it'd be a pedestrian bridge, a bike bridge. I sort of use the bike bridge that is already located over the Allen Brook near Butternut. And it would be similar to that scenario. So, and then there is an existing easement along the access road off of Barrett Lane down towards the Allen Brook. And so those are two benefits that we feel like we can offer. And, you know, there's obviously substantial expense associated with both of those. So those are two things that we think are good that we can offer to the town and would go into the rationale for a specific plan. In exchange for doing that, I think what we're asking for is to really proceed with our current plan. We're in this like transitional period of time where we have where the form-based code is being adopted and being processed, and we are really confident about our plan, and we meet a lot of the goals of form-based code. It is a high density. There are lots of different home types, front-loaded, street-sided, rear-loaded. There's a mix of home types, but there are some differences in that the road structure is different than what form-based code would allow for. And really, we're kind of in a little bit of a limbo position, because if form-based code gets approved and we already have a pre-application and we get growth management, we're actually going to have to go and redesign our project. So it's a little bit of a unique scenario because we are in that current position. The other piece is really we're willing to, we know that the growth center has growth allocation available and that we're going in for all of that. And that the homes, you know, growth management does work well when you're considering homes in terms of the area, and it gets strung out over a period of, let's say, 10 years. However, it doesn't work well for these large apartment buildings. And the infrastructure and the parts and pieces that are required to go in early on are substantial, but yet you can't really get enough growth management to actually build a full building. So what ends up happening is you basically sit and wait until some of those growth management pieces come in. The other component that really isn't discussed, and I forgot, you know, we're really modifying from a 65 unit senior building, and we're basically exchanging an affordable housing unit building in exchange for a senior housing building. And we do feel like, well, one, that's going to have a higher density on the overall project, because senior housing doesn't count towards density, but yet the multifamily would. So our density would be higher than what's currently allowed, but that is in exchange for an affordable housing building. So those are, you know, the reasons why and the benefits that we think that we could bring. And like Ken had asked, I think we're looking for some guidance to say, hey, do these benefits, we know you're not going to give us a preliminary answer on these, but do these benefits seem to be enough for us to start the specific plan process, or in exchange for the couple of items that we're asking for. And, you know, I think one of the pieces here is we're really not trying to avoid growth management. We're willing to hang in there and do growth management, but because of the density that's being proposed and really prescribed in form-based code and in the current land development regulations, it's extremely difficult to do the apartment buildings. Some people would say, well, how did Finney Crossing happen? And how did the apartment buildings get constructed at Finney Crossing? Well, we basically got growth management in 2000, I think it was 2008. And the project didn't start until 2011. because of the recession. And so we essentially bankrolled, all of those residential units to be able to proceed on some of the larger apartment buildings. So that's what happened then. It is a different time now, but I think we also realize that a mix of housing types should be allowed and should be encouraged here. And by having the multifamily buildings, those are challenges. And I guess I'd like to ask Andy, is there anything else that you think, Andy, that we should bring up as benefits and or requests?
No, I think you've summed it up well for this preliminary discussion.
Okay. So be more than willing to answer any questions about our preliminary discussion and thoughts about it.
Okay, thank you for that overview. Planning commissioners, questions, thoughts? Kate, go ahead.
Okay, a couple. So you had said that you may have to revise your plan if form-based code were put in place. Exactly how would that, how much revision would need to happen? Do you foresee?
Well, the street layout would have to change substantially. From my cursory review, I think that that's probably the most substantial, which then dictates housing changes throughout the entire proposed neighborhood. So we are in that weird, if we had the next level of approval, we wouldn't have to, right? We would have rights to the existing code. But because we're in the pre-app position, we would not be able to do that.
And Matt, are you able to kind of give a night? I know it might be too in-depth, but give an idea about what with that would need to change due to form-based code?
So as Chris mentioned, the first thing to remember is that the form-based code regulating plan dictates more or less exactly where the streets would go on this piece of property and how those streets would be configured. So once you've done that, the form-based code then imposes that build to line and parking setback line, which is going to say this is where structures need to go. And then there would be design requirements imposed on the buildings that would be part of this development that are different and generally more prescriptive than the ones that are in place in the bylaw today. So just at a quick glance, and by no means a comprehensive list of things that would be different, keep in mind that in the form-based code, we have maximum building widths. We have minimum amount of the street frontage that needs to be occupied by buildings. So the size and width of the buildings on the street, probably for those large buildings, gets smaller, but they maybe end up closer together or broken into smaller volumes, but closer together. And then going to the regulating plan, a lot of the streets on the regulating plan on this property are yellow. So those are our neighborhood or whatever we decide after the hearing draft, the names of those designations would be. So a lot of that is on the lower intensity scale in terms of minimum 2-story, maximum 3. I'm not sure exactly what some of the other things would be, but that would have some bearing on this as well. So totally. The form-based code takes total control of the street layout and arrangement, and then probably says more about what happens in terms of how buildings are placed, how wide they are on the street. And then, of course, in the architectural and building form standards has a ton to say about what those buildings look like. So don't forget, you've got window and door requirements. You've got a pitched roof requirement, except in cases of solar roof or rooftop garden, et cetera. So whole bunch more and more detailed design requirements imposed on the buildings under the new code than exist in today's bylaws.
Thanks, that was really helpful. And the image that you have on the screen right now is also very helpful. Other questions? Thoughts from planning commissioners? Yeah, Kate, go ahead.
Sorry, I have another.
Yeah, sure.
About the specific benefit and the path to Brennan Woods. I mean, I'm not making any definitive whatever ideas I have on that. I don't know the location of it. I'm not sure provides a huge benefit to the town in and of itself. It may benefit Brennan Woods residents if they want to get more quickly over to Finney Crossing, but it doesn't really connect anything else. So just kind of a thought on that.
But one thing that it would connect is all of, you know, the residential, you're right, it connects.
I live in Brennan Woods, so for your.
Oh, you live in Brennan? Okay.
Yeah.
It connects everything. And you're right, it's not as, it's not like a specific piece, but at the same time, I think it does connect. It allows people like from Butternut to Brennan Woods over to the school, a little bit more of a free flow of access to different areas. So I would agree with you though, that it's, you know, that it's an option, but is it an option that everybody in the town will use? I don't know.
Yeah, and I don't know if, I don't know whose land or whatever, but my thought about a path from Finney Crossing to Brennan Woods and maybe even towards the Allen Brook path would be more across that land that crosses Chamberlain in Brennan Woods. And that way, you know, but again, I don't know what that has, but that would be more connective to me, to people to get to Allen Brook and or Williston Central from Finney Crossing or Brennan Woods to Taps Corners.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else, Kate? Are you?
No, thank you.
Okay. All right, Chapin had his hand up, but put it back down. Oh, wait, I just can't keep up. But did you want Jill to go next? Is that what you were doing, Chapin, or was that inadvertent?
Absolutely, I like Jill to go next, but I just had lowered my hand too quickly. But Jill should go next.
Okay, go ahead, Jill.
Just by like a percentage of your total development, the affordable housing structure is what do you think?
So there's a total of, I think it's 334 homes. So it's about, it's a little less than 20%.
And then I like that you already mentioned in your intro that you wanted it to be, you know, those folks also having opportunities and access. I've had experience in different places where if there's pools and things that you don't have the key card to get in if you're from a certain part of the complex. I don't know if your development's going to have things that are sort of on limits, off limits, but I think being conscientious of not isolating folks who were, you know, being able to have access to the entire space is something that I think is important if and when you want to build that as well.
Absolutely, no question about it. At Finney Crossing, we have the same scenario. We actually have an affordable apartment building. I don't know if many people know that, but and they have all the rights and all the access of everybody else in the neighborhood. And we would plan on having the exact same scenario in this location too.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Jill. Go ahead, Chapin.
Sure. Just speaking frankly, I have a hard time commenting on this, Chris, because as someone who's waited for 10 years for the Essex Alliance Church to finally come in and be able to connect that bike path, that rec path, that went through that gap and not having that happen, and then spending more than a year working on form-based code, trying to think how this space, thinking it was Essex Alliance Church that would do something, if anything. And so for me, coming through that process, I could see we had a lot of residential in the northeast quadrant of Taft Corners and very little in the other three quadrants, none in the southwest. And so I was wanting this property, or to imagine this property being things that would serve the northeast quadrant residents that were already there, such as a dog park and a playground and open space and the rec path that would go through. And the other thing is that working on form-based code, our intention is to make Taft Corners a place rather than having Finney Crossing and Cottonwood and Maple Tree Place, having all these different identities, to sort of have the Taft Corners as a whole be an identity. And what you've done is, and your publicity materials show it too, is you're creating a space that's unique for this area where people belong to this area. So that's not, and you haven't created facilities that other people who live in the northeast quadrant of Taft Corners would be using, such as a senior, a community center or community gardens. And so the things that I had been hoping would happen in this area are not in your plan. And so it's hard for me to think about this in that regard, but I will make a couple of specific comments. One is that as I read the materials you supplied, the connection, if you came down Route 2A from the north, if you're coming down, going south, and you cross the existing bridge that's been built, you would then be going through a sort of a labyrinth of paths. And the ones that are along the streets are, some of them are on raised walkways. And then the ones that are along the streets are shared by pedestrians who are just coming out their dooryards. And it's a little bit convoluted. And so to me, it's not a meaningful connection from that bike path down to the existing one south of there. So to me, that's an interesting path that would be fun to be on, especially if you were a resident of this area and just sort of meandering. But if you were really trying to get from Route 2A south into Zephyr, that doesn't work for me. The path that you proposed adding over to Brennan Woods, I really like connections, and I like that idea, and I like the reuse of the existing access drive to the pumping station on the Brennan Woods sides of the brook, and also on the stormwater pond on the Dunsmore side, so that there's minimal impact to the environment. It's really just the bridge that's the new impact to the environment. So I like those aspects of it, but it's a connection that's not nearly as important as the connection from the existing rec path to the north of this area to the Zephyr Road area to the south. And I feel like you've missed that boat. And so the other thing I would mention is that just watching Finney Crossing, the earlier drawings had much more public green space, and it just kept shrinking and shrinking until there's practically none, in my view, looking at the plans for the area to the north of the power lines. And the areas of green space that are the south of the power lines are more private. They're more for the people in those particular condos that back up to them or apartment buildings. And so I just don't see public green space in what you've done so far. And by packing things in as you've done here, you wind up with houses near trees. And I've watched at Creek's Edge, where the houses near trees, now I see trees marked to be taken down because they're a hazard to people's decks and houses. And so I feel as though everything I see on the east side of this drawing is pushing into the natural area that's there and the trees that are there, and is taking up the space that it should be the rec path coming through, or the rec path could go a different route. But anyway, I have a hard time because I see the existing public benefit of that rec path being blocked, and I don't see it something that's public for people who don't live in this space being present. That's to say nothing of the value about affordable housing. I certainly value that. but I'm not seeing the other public benefit.
Okay, thanks for that comment. Chris or compatriots, do you have a response?
I mean, I would, a couple of things. You make comments about Finney Crossing, and one of the things that people I think sometimes forget that we donated 35 acres to the town of Williston of open space on the north side of the Allen Brook as part of the permitting process of that project. That we don't get much credit for that. We don't ask for much credit for it, but people do tend to forget there's 35 acres of open space that are used by lots of people, and there's trails all throughout there, and that was in a specific intent. Granted,
I was unaware of that. Thanks.
Yeah. So it was a 100-acre parcel, and we developed on 65 and donated 35. So people don't know that, but that is something that we did. It had development potential, and we did not use it. The other piece is at Finney Crossing, there are quite a bit of open spaces, and yes, most of them are for people who live there or tenants. But the other piece that I think is kind of amazing, and I'm there almost every day, is the utilization of the bike path throughout the neighborhood is not limited to the people who live at Finney Crossing.
That's a huge benefit.
There are lots of people all the time, and I know the town is slowly improving the snow plowing of the bike paths, but they're getting there. But as soon as those things really get used all the time, and there's budgets associated with those bike paths, I think you're going to see those get used even more. In terms of the connection from the northern property in the existing bike path where it just sort of dead ends, the idea is to come along that same western property line and connect through over to Finney Crossing where the existing bike path is. However, there is a wetland right in the middle of this property, and which is why there's open space and buffer areas of which we've already designed around. So that creates a real challenge about what do you do with bike paths. And you can see we're showing impacts, and granted the pathways that we have there are not set in stone. We realize that we may have to make some other modifications depending upon what happens with some of the wetland and as we go through some of the next round of permits in terms of wetland impacts. But we do feel like, if there was a way, to connect directly through that area and connect over to Alpine Drive along, and cross over and go over to Finney Crossing, I think that's, it's not perfectly direct, but boy, it's reasonable to think that somebody would be able to use that. The open space that would be there has not been determined to be a public park or a public area, but it would, people, if there's a bike path through it, people will use it. And we have found that to be the case in other neighborhoods as well. So I know that no matter what we do, it's not going to satisfy everybody's desires about how we get people from one place to another and also provide housing, but it is what we were trying to do was really focus on adding those pieces that were important, which was finishing the connection.
By the way, I really liked, this is not part of why you're here, but I really liked seeing the large buildings and the townhouses for the density that they provide, and especially the rear loading ones. So all my thoughts about it are not negative. I was just trying to say, what am I seeing in terms of substantial public benefit? And I'm having a hard time. Thanks.
Yep, you're welcome. I certainly understand. That's our goal, is to understand what this is and whether or not there's a rationale for going through this process or continue on the same path that we already are on.
Okay, other comments or questions? All right, I will just comment for myself that I'm really fond of the form-based code version of things. And I think there's a lot of value in that, and we put a lot of work into envisioning that. And the benefits to that style of design are not just aesthetic, although that's part of it. They're also wrapped up in things like energy use, shared public space, more efficient building and so forth. And really one of the key things for me is to what extent can we feasibly move folks away from a car-oriented living space? And because we have to do that. And not just because of our energy plan, but because the moral imperative of saving our place, our planet. So a couple thoughts on some of the design, for instance. I find that a lot of the areas in the sketches and photos are still very car oriented. Things like garages in the front, the street layout, other dimensions and elements. I would prefer to see something that is more in line with form-based code. Again, this is kind of like just a general gut reaction. I'm not super compelled by this, again, just very personal. I'm not really compelled by 100% AMI affordable housing. I feel like we are really moving toward the 80 or even lower. And in our sort of more recent conversations, that has been where we've been trying to open up discussions. And so that's just something to think about. Yeah, so I'll just leave it there. Those are just kind of some quick sort of gut reactions on my part, having looked at your materials and the designs and the street layout. So
certainly appreciate your feedback and comments. And as one note, really 80% AMI is unachievable from a construction standpoint unless there are government subsidies. I've done them, I build them, we do them, but without a true state or tax credit, they're not achievable. And what we're saying is that we need with the AMI at 100%, you're achieving, and this is a greater discussion, right? About what is the goal of the affordable housing. And I'm involved in a lot of these discussions. And to me, I think there is a need for the 80% and below. And there's also a need for the people who don't really get that benefit, the financial benefit from the government. And so what we need to do is provide more housing in that middle range. That to me is, and you hear about, whether it's the governor's address or other people, it's the missing middle. And what we're missing is the middle. It's the middle income people, and housing opportunities are limited in the state of Vermont. And that we do have government funds for 80% and lower, but we don't have any from that 80 to 120. And then we need to build more 80 to 120. That is a substantial portion of our market. And we need to figure out a way to build more housing at that price point. Because it's going to be important for the long-term stability of the state of Vermont. And it's not just here in Williston, it's not in South Burlington, it's or Chittenden County, it's all over the place. And so I think that's an important component to consider as you think about how these housing pieces come together.
Well, speaking of the governor's address today, it sounds like there is perhaps not all that much political will, but certainly plenty of money at the moment for between all the different federal and state budget items. Anyway, so I'll just kind of, in part because Shayla isn't here and she is one of our most active voices on behalf of affordable housing, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
Okay, any other comments or thoughts on this? Great. So in trying to stay mindful of the time, again, thank you very much for coming in. I think we will have to, again, discuss and hopefully bring our two missing members into the conversation as well and try to give you some kind of a temperature check. Chapin, did you have a final comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I definitely have questions for staff to follow up because I don't want to, I appreciate that Chris and Andy have come in and I want to make sure that we don't leave an opportunity unaddressed. And so I have follow-up questions to see if there isn't somewhere that we could meet.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it and look forward to getting some feedback and we'll go from there.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Moving on to our next item. We need to prepare for our Taft Corners form-based code public hearing. Matt and Emily, I'm recognizing that we're about 40 minutes behind on our timing, and just want to ask you, since you made the agenda, if you think that there's anything we need to adjust here.
Right. So we have the official notice out. We just wanted to give you guys a copy of this because it explains how the form-based code relates to the town plan per statute. And wanted to give you a preview of the form-based code. So in the box are your new packets with the hearing draft. Everything's black text. Any changes that are made during the public hearing will use pink text and give you an overview of what the agenda would be for the night following how a hearing would be. In short, Megan, you'd open the meeting, we'd introduce everybody like you did tonight. Matt would give an overview, Jeff would give an overview. We're breaking up the testimony into two categories for the bylaw. There'll be a Q&A where people can ask questions about how the new form-based code will work, etc., not take any opinion, and then move into the longer form testimony part of the meeting. At the end, it'll really depend on how many people come, what kind of discussion is had, if you want to close the hearing and transmit to the select board, or if you want to continue the hearing. I will note that Matt is talking to Eric about having an informational session on March, I believe March 15th, because March 1st, they don't have a meeting with it being town meeting day. So, maybe one continuance for the hearing so that it can be transmitted for a March 15th info session. And Megan, to make your life easy, we gave you a script. That's all I really had to say about preparing for the hearing.
Okay, great. Thank you, Emily. Any questions for Emily on that?
I was really good with all of it.
Yeah, I really appreciate the meticulous nature of your preparation and that all of those different scripts and points that you made. It makes the hearing a lot less terrifying as a chair. Yeah.
We're trying to get
Thank
the
you.
public outreach out there. We're doing weekly Planners Corner articles, sharing them to Front Porch Forum. There's a couple posters in everybody's packets. I'm going to try to get out this week and get a couple up at, Healthy Living Williston Coffee Shop. But if you can put some up or even give one to a friend and say, come to the meeting. Just trying to get the word out as much as possible.
Great. Would it be helpful for additional posts to Front Porch Forum, like from some of us?
I think so. I think their algorithm, the more I post, Front Porch Forum bumps me down. So I think it's from other planning commissioners. That would be great.
Right.
As a side note, your post about it wasn't a post, the Williston Observer article about the village plan had people on the parent forum of Facebook talking about it, and I jumped in a couple times, but the few comments were there was a lot of, I don't want to see any change, no change.
Yep, no development anywhere.
Yeah, I heard about that. I'm in that group as well. So I saw the comment. I think it's good R&D for the village outreach because we're trying not to change the village too much with better historic preservation standards and then allow for smaller scale increments. So I appreciate that thread from an R&D perspective. And I don't know if I'll respond to it directly, but I definitely know some of the people who've commented.
I was pleased that I commented a couple of times and that the comments back were, I thought, balanced.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions about the preparations for the public hearing?
Just that the packets are ready in the bin outside.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't pick mine up yet. I'm bad.
Great, thanks.
Jill, did you have a question?
I was just checking to make sure if they were in the bin, so I know.
Okay, yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right, so moving right along, what is next? I'm having trouble reading that next piece. Okay, so we have a couple of, let's see, outstanding topics. Is that?
Yeah, I'll be brief and then I'll probably turn it over to Jeff for a moment as well. So this is some of the topics that we talked about at our last meeting on January 4th. In terms of administration transparency, we're thinking about the next step. Okay, once form-based code's adopted, what do those administrative checklists look like? So people can see the zoning administrator's findings when reviewing each element of the code and how it's applied to new development. So the transparency thing is well noted and we're working on the next step of that project. We've provided some more information on parking. Jeff increased the residential parking minimums for both shared and reserved. And do want to note after that discussion last week that there is no maximum limit on shared parking. So these standards in the code set the minimum baseline and developers can build as much parking as they fit and as much parking as they want in that shared capacity. We ran a case study for a 30-unit apartment building with a mix of unit types to show that the standards are not too far off from what the bylaw currently requires, particularly because there's no limit on the maximum share. And realistically, applicants are not going to choose that minimum because our goal here is to get zoning out of the way of market conditions when they're considering their anticipated tenants, couples that do have 2 cars who are living in a studio or 1 bedroom, when they're considering their desired for sale or rent price and ultimately justifying their project to a financer, a bank, they're probably going to go with more parking, at least in this interim, until there's less demand for parking in the distant future. So we just wanted to give you that. We responded to the request for more parking. We ran the numbers to make sure it still works. This is the fun one where I need some feedback from you guys on uniquely Williston names. I think in general, people felt comfortable with urban neighborhood and storefront as being good at explaining what they are, but more differentiation between urban general and urban general too. Yeah, if we want to talk about this now, we can, and then we can talk about shared project journal later, whatever you want to do, Megan.
Okay, well, let's address the building form names. But I do want to back up for a second. Kate, you were, in particular, you were concerned about parking. Do you have any comments on, now that we have a scenario and Jeff has made some changes? Do you have any further comments on that?
So, so the current bylaw, I just want to understand this, the current bylaw requires 2 per unit. Well, it has 2 per unit is the maximum. And we're saying that the minimum would be 0.75 spaces per unit. 0.5 additional per additional bedroom.
Great.
I'm tired tonight.
That's okay. And if you need time to just digest this, that's totally fine. I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, it's fine because I do want to, but I think I might need, I'm just trying to gauge exactly what, I mean, my biggest concern is I don't know why there would be shared parking for residential. I mean, that, you know, each unit has most likely 1 car at this point in time for any number of years in the future. If that changes down the line, then, but right now, I mean, each unit is going to have at least 1 car. So I guess 0.75 still seems a little low, but.
So
Right, and this is the
0.75 would
minimum.
only be for a studio, because as soon as you hit the 1 bedroom, is that correct? Am I doing this right? Okay, so
Right.
0.75.
0.75 per studio, 1 bedroom.
Okay.
And then it's an additional half. So a 2 bedroom would be 1.25 spaces per unit. And we had to be careful with how we tweaked these numbers because you could end up with significantly more parking than's needed for a 3 or 4 bedroom unit. This third line, the maximum reserved is 1 per studio unit. So while that minimum is 0.75, realistically, people will build that maximum reserved of 1 per studio unit.
And don't forget to mention that along with that 0.75 comes a 0.5 that is not dedicated, but that will be there. So that for a couple of units, there's another space that is unreserved, which means it gets used more. So and please don't ask me to do the math, Kate. I'll claim my brain's more tired than yours. But if you think about a small apartment building has how many units, 20, 30 or more? Those numbers, the shared number adds up. So there'll be units, there'll be parking spaces rather there. And when they're reserved, if somebody's gone, they just sit there empty, taking up space. So these will be, the shared will have more turnover, get used more often.
Well, what do you mean by shared? Like, so I assume you're meaning that I don't have parking spot 1A. I just can have a spot in the lot. Is that what you mean by shared?
Well, that would be the shared. The shared units would just be parking, a general shared parking space or set of spaces. The 0.75, what that would translate to, I think in reality, I don't think you could complain that a Miata is a 0.75 space. You need a whole space for 1 car. I have a Miata, so. But what I think that what that would mean is for someone building that, if anyone did build an apartment building with only 0.75, you can bet that would be part of the unit. If you want the other 0.25, they're going to have a set. They would have a set of units that could be reserved. I think that would be, and it's very common in a couple places I've lived. You would pay a little bit more to have your own space.
Right, well,
And
I own a condo in Brooklyn, I mean, not
Mhm.
Brooklyn, Brookline, Massachusetts. And we have one space with that condo, and it's our space, it's the, space, whatever. And that's the only place we can park. There are condos in the building that don't have spaces, which, and they are slightly less expensive. But that's Massachusetts and this is Vermont. So I just don't see anybody coming in and saying, oh, I don't have a car. I just don't see
No,
that.
but they might come in and be fine with parking when they find a parking spot, which is what I do because my garage is full of stuff on street. And there's going to be a lot more shared parking, A, and B, there's a ton of unused massive parking lots all over the place. So what we did, Kate, was we kicked the numbers up so that for each unit, whether it's a 1-bedroom or a studio, there will be one, if I do my math right, 0.75 and 0.5, 1.25 spaces.
Right, I guess I just see an issue if there's a 1-bedroom, because 1-bedroom still needs one parking space.
And there's still the maximum reserve, so they still can build, every single unit can have its own reserved space. Any additional vehicles would then have to use the shared spaces. But this bylaw still allows for, a 30-unit apartment building. Each unit has its own reserved space.
So they could do, if they wanted, they could
More
do 60 reserved.
bedroom unit.
So they can have 2 if you have 2+ bedrooms regardless. But the minimum, allowing a developer, which they likely wouldn't at this point, they could put 0.75.
No, that's the minimum the government is telling them they have to have. This code, although it says the maximum reserved you could have would be 1 per studio, 1-bedroom, or 2 for 2-bedroom. So there is a maximum limit on reserved, but the stuff that's shared and unmarked, not assigned to any particular apartment, there's no limit on that. But you could do, and some might do, apartments that have 2 units, 2 parking spaces, sorry.
Yeah.
Even for a studio.
Okay, so we do need to move
It's a little-
on. And I guess, I think that there has been a shift, and I would just want to recognize that. And I also appreciate the comment that, developers are going to respond to the market. And so they, they will be providing parking as the market demands. Okay, can we move on to building form names? Emily wants some feedback quickly from us on these. This was for the regulating plan and the different spaces of the area that was under form-based code. I agree sorry, I just was going to say that I agree that storefront and urban neighborhood are fairly straightforward and understandable. But Chapin and then Jeff, you may have some comments for us.
Which one is urban neighborhood?
That's the yellow. It's typically on the outer edges of the area.
Oh, I see that, and it's not one of the choices because we're fine with it as it is. Okay.
Right.
What I wanted to say is under urban general, I apologize for saying social solar city in one of my responses. I don't like that. I also don't think we should have the word town in it because I'm worried about Taft Corners development area being thought of as the town center when the village is the town center in the sense that most of us think of it. And so I like core, period. Just or the Taft Corners core or the I guess you could say urban core. But in terms of the bullets there, I would wanted to go right by the first two.
Mhm.
Go ahead, Jeff. You're
All right,
muted.
I'm muted. Yeah, I don't mean to confuse people, although some of you might disagree with that. After all these meetings, I have a suggestion, and it's not on this. My suggestion would be to take the urban general, which is the more intense, got an extra story, and call that something like, and I think I don't have any problem with town core or the center or something, and call the urban general 2 the urban neighborhood, because I think that's really kind of what we're making here is an urban neighborhood. And then the urban neighborhood, which is the smallest, something more like just neighborhood. So there's an urban neighborhood and then there's a neighborhood.
So one of my thoughts on this was, I think we really need to get rid of the word urban. And I'm saying that as an urban geographer, but
I agree.
I just don't think I think it's off-putting. And I think people, as much as I love cities, I don't think people really are prepared to see a city here yet. And so I just feel like the term urban is not helpful. And I'm thinking ahead to this public hearing. I just feel like it's not just a neutral descriptor. I feel like it's got baggage in
It's
this
also
region.
inaccurate, right? It's not urban.
Right.
Like I just don't think of it as urban, even regardless of what we build and how tall, it's still not going to be urban the way urban is.
So
Go ahead, Jeff.
So you think urban is the crappy stuff with poverty and parking lots and crime? I don't know.
Well, no, I
No.
don't. As a professional
know.
urban geographer, of course I
I
don't.
know,
but
I was kind of
yeah.
talking to Jill. I don't think urban, anyway, but let's ditch it. But on the other hand, can we use town? Because I did notice in the town plan, it is calling for both a downtown and a town center.
Yeah.
So that might be less.
Mhm. See,
less
I
heinous than
propose, I
town.
mean, the idea
Urban.
of town core and using the word town, like I'm totally fine with that. And I live in the village too, next door to Chapin. Because to me, it's totally fine having the town and the village. Like they've got their own identities. They're part of the same, overarching town, but and maybe this is reflecting, part of my having lived in New York State, where I lived in in a place that was the village of East Aurora within the town of Aurora. And so, that kind of thing happens. And, there's not really a municipal separation. It's not like Essex Junction and Essex and all of their weird shenanigans. To me, like calling that town core and then figuring out the rest of the categories as a way to get rid of the word urban. To me, that makes perfect sense, but I don't want to shove my view on people. Go ahead, Jeff.
I would, and I'm trying to keep my dog out of the fight because it's your all's, but I'm wondering if I would think center would be a little less loaded than core. And that building form standard covers more than just the core. It's sort of, well, forget I said that part because it's kind of the same thing. But I'm surprised that core doesn't strike people with some of those same problems as urban.
I'm interested in other people's opinion, but for this one, and this first one is the hardest for me, but it's something like Taft Corners Center work.
Yeah, like Taft Corners Center storefront center, make urban general, neighborhood general, and then the urban neighborhood. I really love strollable neighborhood.
But
And they
that
also
suggests
have to
that the
control-
other places are, you can't stroll.
All
I don't know.
strollable, but that's the most residential, where I think the most strollers and babies are gonna be wandering around on the new big sidewalks. I don't know.
What if they all started with TC as in Taft Corners? So we're saying it's something unique about Taft Corners and not trying to use words that would go beyond that.
Mhm.
Like
Could
TC
you say
Center. So TC Center, TC Storefront, TC, whatever we call the urban general too. And
DC neighborhood.
that's what it was, TC neighborhood. And then what did you say for the last one?
Oh, I just neighborhood.
But you had something different you had the orange one neighborhood and the yellow was something else.
Oh, I had like, yeah, I had the word, urban neighborhood.
I see.
So I'm no help.
Hey, did you say something before? I think I might have missed it. I think there was like crosstalk.
Oh, no. Well, I was just saying, I said TC neighborhood, but I meant for the last one, for the urban general too. I mean, I agree with getting rid of urban.
Oops.
What does Jill think?
TC is, I'm from a town that's TC, Traverse City, Michigan. So TC is very, I don't know. I honestly don't really like any of I don't know that we're the best brainstorming for names, people. That's not really.
I wonder if we should turn this over to our broader public. And I wish we could have our public hearing in person and have like a sticky note board where people could propose propose some suggestions.
And planning staff.
And staff, yeah.
Yeah, like TC Flex, TC Core, those sounds like sports teams that I grew up playing on because everybody was TC.
That's funny. Okay, I'm not sure we're going to really resolve this at the moment.
Right.
How did like Finney Crossing and those, were they named Finney because of like a watershed, or are there watersheds that we could talk about that are specific to where these areas overlay? I would like to have it connected to the land and kind of, I don't know if we can.
Yeah, Zephyr Road is Beaudry Zephyr, who was the original farmer, I believe.
Okay, and Taft's was the original farmer, right? So that's why that's all covered. But like if there's streams or things that have names, it could be cool to call it, stream center, and just kind of, I don't know, trying to tie in both that we're building development, that's what we're writing for, but also that it's sitting on something else.
If I could jump.
Muddy Brook.
Okay.
Muddy Brook or Allenbrook.
If I could add on to that, I think it would be really nice to find out some of the Native American names. I don't know what they called Allenbrook. And when we were talking about preferred street names too in the area, I think it'd be nice to find out some of that.
Yeah. I think the state archaeologist, Jess Robinson, he may have, if he's still in that position, he has done some work in Williston in some of the archaeological digs, and he might have a sense of what those names are. I don't know, Melinda, do you know? Yeah, so that I would love to have some input on that, because I think that would be a really.
I can solicit it. I have a list of people to contact about the Native American stuff near Allenbrook School, and I could include this question in what I'm asking them.
Perfect.
I think like Muddy Brook residents or something like that, that sounds great to me. It's not like, you know, I'm not afraid of mud, but maybe that's kind of something else for people. But if there are other things that we could point out, I think that would be nice.
Hi all. So this is shared project journal, a quick wrap up here. Thinking about solar and energy, thinking about the charge and the direction that's set for the new energy committee that's being appointed. And thinking about the large parking lots and flat roofs that are in Taft Corners, but also the industrial zoning district. For example, IBM is 12 acres. So there's a lot of places where not even greenfield needs to be developed for solar, but existing roofs, existing parking. And thinking about the next step of that. There's a comment about public green space percentage. So everything is within a 3-minute walk of a civic green. And there is a bylaw amendment proposed as well to offset the civic green cost from the rec impact fee to further incentivize the creation of public spaces. I think we've been over the dogs and pets before. This is a good segue from what Chapin was talking about earlier. So creating identity of Taft Corners as a place, you know, the town center, which is a bit different than the village core. This could be an opportunity for placemaking or a branding package. It's a grant opportunity, promoting it as a place for small scale entrepreneurs, etc. So definitely something for the town to think about. I'm pretty sure our Williston logo on the town page was created when the town manager bought whatever basic branding package or website. And you know, the website needs to be updated for sure. So I think thinking about the town branding in the future. And lastly, the tree maintenance town arborist. Thinking about, you know, Bruce Hoare as our DPW director. He's also the tree warden, has a lot on his plate. And Vermont Urban and Community Forestry has their tree steward program and creating a volunteer group that can help with the maintenance. Yeah, Jeff, did you have something to add?
Oh, very brief and a little bit abstractly. Chapin, if you have a pencil ready. I just wanted to mention the pages where you can see where we've done, there's been some mention, reference, or picture about solar charging stations and environment, etc. And I think I did not get them all, but I think with solar I did. Page 2, second paragraph, page 22, page 36, 53, 57, and 79. I could get more specific, but I didn't want to take too much time.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that overview, Emily. Do we have, let's see, you mentioned that the packets are available. Do we have anything else we need to do on that item regarding the public hearing draft posted online? The middle bullet under 8 p.m.
Oh yeah, that's linked. So everything's uploaded on mytaftcorners.com, where it can be downloaded and viewed by the public. This is a segue to the last item I had on the agenda on the events page. I linked to all of your past meetings directly where Jeff starts his presentation. So if you missed building form or architecturals and you want to refresh, all of that is linked here.
That's great. So nice to have it all in one place. Perfect. All right. Great. So are we finished? Taylor, do you have something to tell us?
No, thank you.
Okay.
Excited for the first.
All right.
To adjourn.
All right. We love that. Thank you so much, everybody. And we'll see you in 2 weeks at the public hearing. And looking forward to it. Spread the word.
Spread the word.
I just want to say I appreciate all those responses and also the picture of the solar panels over the parking example. So, thank you,
Great.
guys.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
At all.